Because first, the breaking news that you should know about, that CBS News now reporting that 18 bodies have been recovered from the Potomac River following the plane crash. And we're getting kind of the last few minutes, Ken, of what happened to Flight 5342 and to the Black Hawk helicopter. I'm going to read this to you and see what you think of it. It says, a few minutes before landing, air traffic controllers asked the arriving commercial jet if it could land on the shorter runway 33 at Reagan National, and the pilots said they were able. Controllers then cleared the plane to land on runway 33. Flight tracking sites showed the plane adjust its approach to the new runway. Less than 30 seconds before the crash, an air traffic controller asks the helicopter if it has the arriving plane in sight. The controller makes another radio call to the helicopter moments later. PAT-25 passed behind the CRJ. Seconds after that, the two aircraft collide. The plane's radio transponders stopped transmitting about 2,400 feet short of the runway, roughly over the middle of the river. The tower immediately began diverting other aircraft from Reagan. So it sounds like there were a couple of attempts to get a hold of this helicopter, and there was no response. And it seems to be, when you look at the video, that this was kind of toward the rear of the airplane. Ken, what do you think of that, the scenario as it's kind of laid out in that timeline?
I was listening to John Scott earlier, and I agree with his statement. The departing aircraft the crew could have bit off and saw that, but the controller, from what you're saying, said an arriving aircraft. So, but the crews get eyeballs on the other one; they could bite off on that. And while they were looking for that, and maybe there was a little confusion in the cockpit when the collision happened. So. That's what I think probably was most likely happening. But it'll become more clear as they sift through the data and clearly when they recover the wreckage. But the recovery of the bodies, clearly, I would say survivors. If there were survivors, and the temperature of the water is you're only going to be in there for 10, 15 minutes before you just can't move anymore. So the time that's has passed is not good for any survivors.
Yeah, the news conference happening in about 23 minutes, Ken. But what I'm surprised at is that, you know, you look at some of this and you've got a lot of people around the country that are now going on to these websites where you can actually listen to the air traffic controllers talking to the various aircraft. And we have yet to hear of any message. The last one they heard was a few minutes before landing to Flight 5342 saying that, can you land on runway 33? But so far, Ken, we have not heard any outreach to the aircraft from the air traffic controller about emergency situation or watch out for the Black Hawk helicopter or anything like that. Do you find that unusual, or they just simply did not have time and you have one controller trying to handle two aircraft in that same area?
No, Trace, that's not unusual because the aircraft on final approach, they don't want to be distracted by that, and they were under radar control, and the helicopter had responsibility for separation of the IFR, or the American Airlines traffic. So that was their responsibility. The controller tried twice to get eyeballs on the helicopter crew on that aircraft, and it did not look like that was successful.
All right. Thank you, Ken. We appreciate it. Let's go back to Dan Elwell, former FAA Deputy Administrator. He has also flown in and out of DCA Airport with American Airlines for 16 years, so he is very familiar with the area. And maybe the same to you, because you know the FAA procedures, you know the whole thing that we're talking about here. And I'm wondering if you find any of the conversation, if the warnings to the Black Hawk helicopter or the final conversation with the regional jet, anything unusual about that at all, Dan?
No, it doesn't strike me, what I've heard, the little that I've heard, as unusual. I will tell you, though, for pilots familiar with DCA, as I was, in all the years that I flew in and out of there, I only landed on 3-3. a couple of times. I flew a larger jet, so that would have been a rare occurrence. The regionals land on 3-3 with more frequency, but being asked if you can do 3-3, and I'm not sure when that question was asked. The later that request comes, the more sort of not difficult, but more challenging the approach becomes, especially at night. And it is hard to acquire aircraft against all the lights of the city. The city lights can drown out the lights of an aircraft. And so both aircraft at the moment of impact were both as what we call VFR, because the American aircraft would have been doing an instrument approach to one that he broke off from to do a visual approach and landing to 3-3. I'm not convinced in looking at the video that it was a strike or a impact from behind. The jet would have been going significantly faster, I think, than the helicopter, although I'm not familiar with helicopters' operating speeds.
And I'm wondering, you asked the question, and I just wanted to give you clarity. It says on the release, a few minutes before landing, air traffic controllers asked the arriving commercial jet if it could land on the shorter runway 33 at Reagan National, and the pilot said they were able. So when you talk about readjusting to land on the shorter runway, do you also have to readjust the strategy to land, Dan? Are you coming in a little bit lower, a little bit earlier, because the runway happens to be shorter? You don't have the benefit of being able to land mid-runway, so you want to land as soon as you cross the threshold.
So you're hitting your altitude marks the same every time you land, and getting instructions or a request to land at 3-3 a couple minutes before, that's not odd, particularly, and it is normal for the controller to ask them, can you take 3-3, because it's shorter, so they do a quick calculation with their weight and their landing speeds, and so they took it. That's perfectly normal. So the way it works at DC very well. It was rare that I would fly an approach there day or night and not see a helicopter, but geometry works. So the helicopters will stay low. Very low and towards the Maryland side, so that when an aircraft does descend to land on 3-3 or 1, they're almost always several hundred feet separation. And everything I've heard so far, that calling out the traffic, do you have the traffic in sight, pass behind, that's typical. Clearly, who I think that was the helicopter who had reported the aircraft in sight, either was looking at something that was not the aircraft or lost the aircraft at some point. Visual.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and just to clear that up, I'm not sure that the helicopter ever responded, Dan, just for clarity here, because they asked twice. One time they were asked, they said, go to the back to the thing, and then they asked, do you see the jet? And there was no response. So I don't believe there was ever any response, at least from the way John Scott is reading the transmission between the tower and the aircraft. There was, as far as we know, no response from the helicopter at all, saying, yes, I see it, no, I don't. It was just, do you see the aircraft? And go to the rear of the aircraft, trying to get this thing off. And I'm wondering now, because we were just reporting, Chad Pergram was saying that he could see part of the fuselage sticking out of the water in the Potomac River. And now we're getting information, this is from NBC News, the regional plane that crashed in midair near Reagan Airport broke into two pieces, Dan. Sources telling NBC Washington it is in roughly 7 feet of water. Divers are in the water as well. The helicopter itself is upside down in the water. It's very unstable. So you have a plane in two pieces in 7 feet of water, very shallow, and you have a helicopter that's upside down and very stable. If you look at that, if you're a rescue team and you're sending people out, what's the thought there?
Well, I would imagine, and I'm not a rescue expert by any means, but in that shallow water, I think that the time from notification, and these rescue folks are real professional and do a wonderful job. I imagine they were in the water as fast as they possibly could be.
Yeah. Dan, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Now, if we can, you see the scene there. This is brand new information, by the way. So to give you kind of a rundown of where we are, in the bottom half of your screen, the right-hand corner, we are expecting a news conference to start in roughly 15 minutes. We're not sure who is going to be involved in that news conference. We were told earlier that the press conference would happen actually in Wichita, Kansas. Well, now apparently this whole thing has been shifted to DCA. We know that Sean Duffy is on scene, and we know that others are also on scene, but we've gotten information that the search and rescue teams, that people out there have now learned that this aircraft apparently broke into two pieces and it landed in the Potomac, and it is now in 7 feet of water, and that the helicopter landed upside down and is right now very unstable. And the latest news coming in, CBS reporting that 18 bodies have been recovered from the Potomac following this crash. I want to bring in House Homeland Security Chairman and former Army Special Operations Flight Surgeon Mark Green. Mr. Chairman, we know that you know this aircraft very well and how to get out of it when it goes into the water. What can you tell us? What do you know? And when you hear that it's in 7 feet of water and the Black Hawk helicopter is upside down, what do you think about this scenario?
Well, most of the time when an aircraft goes in the water, particularly a helicopter, the engines are on top, so it's going to rotate. We do dunker training once a year to prepare for this, and it's extremely difficult to get out of it. You pretty much have to memorize your way out of the aircraft because in this situation, it's black water, it's night. This is exactly what I'd expect. And 7 feet of water is, if you can't get out of the aircraft, that's more than enough to make it unsurvivable. They have to get out of the aircraft, to make it. So hopefully they did. This is a tragedy. And you have to think about, too, those non-trained passengers in that aircraft, in the American Airlines aircraft, their seatbelts are buckled. Even if that part of the aircraft is intact and it hits the water, it's probably going to rotate, and they got to find their way out. It's just horrifying even thinking about it. And so again, this is a massive tragedy.
Yeah, and Congressman, it's interesting, but when you watch this coverage, as you watched it all night, and by the way, we should just clarify something. We were told that that Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy was on the scene. He is not at DCA. He just informed us that he is not at DCA. We do not know if he's going to be there. So just for clarity, we do not know who's going to be at this news conference, if there will be officials from the airline, if there will be members of Congress, the governor. We do not know who is going to be at the news conference. But I'm wondering, as you watch the coverage here, what is something about this that you are not hearing? What information are you curious that you're not getting out of this?
Well, one of the observations I think having done aircraft investigations, the flight surgeon does the human part. We check the pilots, or we check them for various substances and chemicals and things. All that happens when there's a crash, right? And so the flight surgeon's involved in the crash investigation. And 90% of the time, 95% of the time, it's multiple different things that line up. It's not one specific. People talk about, well, did the Black Hawk pilot see the aircraft that was taking off, get target fixation on that, and miss the one that was landing? You hear people talking about ATC and the time frame between the warning and the actual collision. Was that enough warning time from ATC? This is probably going to have many, many different things in it that should have gone differently that resulted in this happening. And I think that's really important to point out. It's not, very rarely is it one particular thing that leads to a catastrophe like this.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's spot on, because when I was learning to fly, they would always tell you, listen, it's not one thing that causes a crash. And this is back in the days where you had TWA Flight 800. It's not just one thing. It's always a series of events that happens. Yes. And as investigators kind of start peeling this back, they get to see, even for things like this that seems to be a collision in midair, you go back to the collision for, I think, the original PSA Airlines back in San Diego back in the 1970s, where a small plane hit PSA, killed everybody on both planes. It was a series of different changes, a series of altitude changes, a series of mistakes made by the person who was flying the small plane. So you're exactly right. And the question is we are right now, Congressman, in the safest period in American history, in world history, in aviation. Clearly, it only goes back for the better part of 100 years, but still, we are in the safest time frame in American history for aviation. This would be the second fatal commercial airline crash in the past 16 years, and only the third since 2001.
Yeah, and it occurred in probably the most, for our country, one of the highest penetrated air-controlled airspaces, right? I mean, DCA and over the White House and over the Capitol building, I mean, the amount of radars and things that are monitoring that airspace, probably the thickest, some of the thickest in the country, and this still happened. So there's going to be, some analysis on this for many weeks. But we have to get to the bottom of it, obviously.
Yeah, we do. Mark Green, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. If you think of anything else, come back on. We would love to hear from you again. We can see the lights there on the horizon. We see in the bottom right-hand corner there, the news conference. They are kind of gearing up for this. We're now told to be 10 minutes away. It might move up. It might slide a few minutes, but we will bring that to you live when it happens. We got some new information in the past few minutes. As you see the lights there, you see the rescue response. It is all hands on deck. We have been told that Reagan National will not reopen again until 5 o'clock in the morning on Friday. So we've got, close to 36 hours before this thing reopens again. That's going to give them time to do the investigation. It's going to give them time to kind of process how this thing is going to go. And they don't want anybody landing or taking off over a crash site. And now we've learned that the Potomac River, the plane is in two parts in the Potomac, and it is in 7 feet of water, which is why our congressional correspondent Chad Pergram was out there saying that he could see the tail section, or he could see the fuselage of the plane sticking out of the water. And the Black Hawk helicopter is also visible. It's upside down, and we're being told it's very unstable. So we've got that, and that's interesting. And we're learning more about the final transmissions. And there's been some confusion on some of the releases, because we have read the last two transmissions from the tower to the helicopter pilot, and they were asking questions, but there was no, at least as far as we have learned so far, there was no response at all. And this is video again of what am I hearing? What am I seeing this, Jillian? Oh, okay. So the CEO of American Airlines has just released a statement, a video. We'd like to play that for you right now. This is the first comment we have seen from American Airlines. Watch this.
I'd like to express our deep sorrow about these events. This is a difficult day for all of us at American Airlines, and our efforts now are focused entirely on the needs of our passengers, crew members, partners, first responders, along with their families and loved ones.
Yeah, and again, we don't know if American Airlines is going to have a representative at this news conference. Truth Social, the president, posted the following, quoting here: "The airplane was on a perfect and routine line of approach to the airport. The helicopter was going straight at the airplane for an extended period of time. It is a clear night. The lights on the plane were blazing. Why didn't the helicopter go up or down or turn? Why didn't the control tower tell the helicopter what to do instead of asking if they saw the plane? It's a bad situation that looks like it should have been prevented, not good." I think the tower did try to inform the helicopter pilot to go behind, if they saw it, and then to go behind. That was the transmission we got. So, and it's unclear if there was a response, and it's also unclear if the tower tried to reach out to the plane. But the pilots we have had on, the experts say they wouldn't want to bother the plane right now if they didn't think it was an absolute critical situation. And at that time, it appears they were just kind of checking to make sure that the Black Hawk helicopter pilots saw the jet And we're telling them, we're kind of guiding them to go toward the rear, go toward the back of the plane to clear the area. So again, you have flight 5342 came out of Wichita. It had 60 passengers on board and 4 crew members. And you have 2 pilots and you have 2 flight attendants. And you had on the helicopter, the Black Hawk helicopter, 3 soldiers, and we're told it was a training flight, which indicates nothing as far as the experience of the person who was actually flying on the plane. It was simply a training flight. They go up and do training flights all the time. It doesn't mean it was a flight training flight. It was a flight to go out and do routine training, which they do every single day and many times every day. So that's not an indication of who was on board and what their expertise level was on board. But clearly something happened when the plane was at 400 feet and coming in at 140 miles per hour, the Black Hawk helicopter and the plane collided. The CRJ-700 carrying 64 people collided and are now upside down. That's a live look at, is that inside the airport, inside DCA? It looks to be a live look inside DCA, and we don't know if those are the people who are waiting. That looks like just the media waiting for this news conference to begin. We showed you a picture on the other side of the actual podium for the news conference, and that would start sometime in the next 4 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, if it starts on time. Do we still have Armin Kurdian? Still on? Okay, we don't. I want to bring in retired Navy captain and former Virginia Senate candidate Hung Cao. He also served in Navy Special Operations as a deep sea diver. Mr. Cao, we hear you've actually salvaged a plane wreckage before. What can you tell us about the situation where you have a plane in 2 pieces in the Potomac in 7 feet of water and the helicopter is close by, also upside down? How do you approach this?
Well, Chase, again, what a tragedy, and my heart goes out to the family. At some point, we're going to have to shift from a rescue operation to a salvage operation. So we need to bring in barges and a crane on a barge, and then we would mobilize right now the Expeditionary Diving and Salvage Unit 2 down in Norfolk, Virginia, bring them up here with divers and chafing gear and studying the planes for, strong points so we can lift them up, where we can attach the bridle and pull up the parts and pieces of plane. The first order of battle is really to find the black box, recover that, because this is now an open investigation. And, so it's a hard call. At some point, the on-scene commander is going to say, okay, we're going to shift to a salvage operation. And if it was me, I would wait until the day to start diving again, because once it shifts into a salvage operation, there's no rush. We have to be careful. There's a lot of charred metal out there, and there's a lot of fuel and everything else. We have to protect the divers. And I know people think, oh, it's only 7 feet of water, but you can get embolized. Artillery gas embolism is the biggest fear for that shallow depth.
Right. Yeah, and I'm wondering, and you would know this better than anybody, I'm wondering if the people on scene already know. I mean, they clearly, if divers have been out there, if they've been in the water, if it's 7 feet, there is a very good chance, I'm assuming, that they have either been in the fuselage or close enough to the fuselage to realize exactly what this situation looks like and can get a very good assessment in a very short amount of time.
Yes, absolutely. They've already done the initial search. They're looking all around the aircraft and inside the aircraft. I don't want to give people false hope, but, sometimes the autonomic system, what we learn in ice diving is the autonomic response is that you stop breathing. That's why you hear stories of kids falling through the ice and they're found like 20 minutes later and resuscitated and they're alive, because your body just stops breathing, right? It's just an automatic thing that God gave you that just stops all the breathing. And but this has been a while now, and so at some point the on-scene commander is going to have to call it and say, okay, we're shifting to salvage operations. And at that point, the salvors would come in. We've done a lot of these salvage operations before. And you just take your time and do it right, because you don't want to put other people in danger, other divers, and and you want to recover the plane as intact as possible.
But I would also assume that getting inside, and again, we're still waiting for the news conference. It has not begun. We will go to it live when it does. Getting inside the helicopter, Mr. Cow, has got to be a kind of a different, it's got to be a different strategy altogether, because the helicopter, our understanding is, from those on the scene, the helicopter is upside down. And I'm not sure if that makes it accessible. Do you have to go underwater to access it and then go up into the helicopter where there might be air pockets? And so that seems to be a little bit more difficult of a situation to figure out.
Again, I would open the two doors and then put a bridle through there, and then using a crane, I'd pull the fuselage out of the water. That would be the first thing we recover, obviously. And that's why I want to float some barges there and a crane on a barge, so you can safely recover these fuselages.
Yeah. Any question that you think should be asked at the news conference? If you were on scene, if you were part of the search and rescue team, what would you want to know from this news conference? Anything about the final seconds of the flight? Anything that could give you an advantage on how you proceed?
No, not really. I mean, at this point, once it becomes a salvage operation, we just need to know how many bodies to recover, so we can recover those first and take them out of the water and then pull the fuselage up. Because what you don't want is to pull a plane out and just we still have remains inside.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an awful situation, Mr. Cow. Thank you very much for your expertise. We appreciate it. I want to go back very quickly to Paul Morrow, who clearly has information. He gets a lot from these situations. Paul, from the last time we talked, we have now learned that the fuselage that Chad Pergram said that he saw is visible, and you can see some of it sticking out of the water because the water is only 7 feet deep. And these fuselage, for anybody who's looking for clarity, is roughly 76 feet wide and 100 feet long. So these parts of the airplane could be sticking out, protruding pretty visibly, Paul.
Yeah, and but one of the things I would point out, I was talking about the Miracle on the Hudson earlier. That was a larger plane. It was an Airbus, and yet sitting in the middle of the Hudson, it looked minuscule, looked like a toy. These things in a river, you lose sight of how large the field that you have to search is. So I'm sure that they're going to continue to endeavor rescue operations for the time being. But at some point, as the good captain said, you're going to segue into just realistically recovery, and they're going to be looking for that black box. Both aircraft should have black boxes. And one of the salient things here, I think, to remember is that those black boxes are going to have cockpit conversations. So while we have a lot of data now, there are FAA recordings, and we have some of the technical data. We know what the temperature was, etc. We've got the video. You want to hear what was going on in that cockpit, what was said, who saw what, and that should give us a little bit more clarity. But in terms of the rescue operation going on right now, I wish I had better news. I don't really have any news, but I would say right now, as time goes on, obviously your hopes begin to diminish.
Yeah, they do. I mean, Mr. Cow was just telling us here, the water is at 37 degrees, Paul. They have clearly been inside the fuselage because they're telling us some information. They have pulled 18 bodies out of the water. We don't know if those were in the water when they were recovered or if they were inside the airplane. That information is unclear. We hope to find out during the news conference. But there is a lot of things we don't know about the final seconds. We see the video, but the video seems to be farther away. And I'm sure as the hours and days come through, you're going to see better video. There's video cameras everywhere, and especially at an airport, there are video cameras everywhere. You will see better video of this, but from this vantage point, you can see the explosion, you can see the contact, you can see the explosion. It's just really hard to tell at which point on the aircraft the explosion happened or the contact happened, Paul.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the other things that's going on now on land here as an element of the search and rescue is that you're trying to make order out of chaos here. And one of the things they're going to be getting, I'm sure, from American Airlines, I'm sure they have it already, is the manifest. You want to see who was on that plane, but that doesn't mean it's entirely accurate. A lot of instances down through history where you have plane crashes where people are reported to be on the plane. Turns out they weren't. Planes always take off with people who missed the plane, change their flights at the last minute. I've been involved in investigations where people were on planes that were not supposed to be, and was stopped at some point even while the plane was taxiing. So this stuff can be a little bit loose, and so you're going to be wanting to try to match up the manifest with, unfortunately, the 18 bodies that we know so far, because what comes now, and this is going to be left likely to D.C. police, is going to be death notifications. They'll be in contact with other agencies in various local areas. Sometimes the local agency will go out, the local police, depending on where the people are from. But this is obviously about the toughest job that any police department or federal agency has to ever do. But at some point here, when this information is hardened up and you got the right name and you got the right person, we're going to get into that piece of it as well as part of the whole aftermath here.
Yeah, and it's also, one of those things where people are wondering who was on the plane, who was on the flight coming in from Wichita into Wichita, the home of Cessna, coming in from Wichita into D.C. Were there any prominent people on board the airplane is another question that will be asked in the next several minutes and hours, Paul, because you have this situation where every plane that lands in the D.C. area potentially has a prominent member of the government or a lawmaker, and the list goes on.
Sure. And so the thing about this is you absolutely have to get that right. And so they, I am sure, are being very meticulous before making any notifications, because they want to make sure they got the right people, and, because God forbid you do the wrong thing. The other thing that we should mention is that there is going to be, as we've said, the airport's closed. It's one of the busiest airports in the world. And so you have a lot of people stranded. And one of the things you don't really hear about that's kind of going on offset here is that you have thousands of people who are at that airport expecting to leave, and they're stranded there. And, very often you're not going to be able to get them into hotels. And so what happens to their care and feeding? This is going to fall to the local cops as well. We used to use the Red Cross. They're very, very helpful in large-scale disasters. A building collapses or something like that. They show up with cots. You take over a local high school. You start putting people in there. But this is a whole tangential thing that the local cops will be doing relative to this event that you won't really see, but is certainly going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Paul Morrow, thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Let's bring in John Scott, the host of the Fox Report. He's also a licensed pilot with more information on this. John, are you going over any of the transcripts, any of the tower recordings? What have you gleaned? Any tone or tenor that you heard from the people who were speaking?
Well, I would echo what you said, Trace. I've listened to the audio, and the helicopter pilot was being asked to turn behind that inbound jet, and you never hear a response, as you've pointed out. You never hear a response from the helicopter pilot. They were talking to the chopper pilot and not to the jet crew. The flight path of the jet crew is, perfect. It appears that everything was normal from their standpoint. They would have been on final approach. There's a nice, easy curve to their approach to runway 33. They are losing altitude at what appears to be the appropriate rate. There is some indication that the helicopter was higher than it was supposed to be at 350 feet rather than maybe 200 feet. And I would point this out too, Trace, and it sort of echoes what Jonathan Gilliam had to say earlier. This collision took place at about 350 feet altitude. That is, the top of a 35-story building.
Right.
And if you look at the collision, it's pretty obvious that even the jet aircraft plunges virtually immediately down to the water. Now, my pilot friends who have flown into Reagan significant numbers of times say that that runway approach into 33 is basically over a mud flat. So when you say that, the water's only 7 feet deep, that makes sense. And if that plane fell from a height of, 350 feet and went essentially straight down into the water, the chances of anyone surviving that impact are virtually nil.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And I also wonder, John, because I've been kind of going over these transcripts and I see this very clearly in a couple of reports where you had the tower calling saying priority air transport 25 passed behind the CRJ. But there were reports earlier, John, that they said, do you see the CRJ? And I haven't seen any replication of that yet.
No, I did hear that on the control tower audio. I heard them ask, "Do you have the regional jet in sight?" I didn't hear a response from the chopper, which makes me wonder if they were on the right frequency. Frankly, this whole thing reminds me of a crash that took place in New York City back in 2009 that I had a hand in covering, when a light plane, a 6-seat plane, collided with a tourist helicopter over the Hudson River at about 1,000 to 1,500 feet, and 9 people were killed. The Cherokee, the Piper Cherokee plane involved has low wings, and the pilot has difficulty seeing anything much below the horizon line. The helicopter was sort of overtaken from the rear, and the two just didn't see each other, and that seems to be what happened here. The jet was on an instrument flight path. The other thing too is my friend who has flown for the airlines for years says TCAS, the traffic collision avoidance system. Between jets, it will tell commercial jetliners, if there is a problem, if there's an imminent collision, and it will instruct, the computer will instruct, the pilot what to do to avoid a collision. His question, and this is a very experienced pilot, his question is, does the Army equip its Black Hawk helicopters with the TCAS system? Because you can't have one talking to an aircraft that doesn't have TCAS. They both have to have TCAS on board.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we were talking about earlier, John. And I'm wondering, just to kind of to fit the timeline here, you talk about that, and I'm also wondering, when you listen back to the tower transmissions, the conversation between, not even a conversation, the one-way, the warnings or whatever, you say that you heard, "Do you have the regional jet in sight?" And we know they also said, quoting, you have this priority air transport pass behind the CRJ. What was said first, John? Did they warn, "Do you have the regional jet in sight?" or did they say pass behind the CRJ, and then did they say, "Do you have it in sight"?
Trace, I would have to go back and listen to it again, and I can do that before I talk to you again the next time. I believe the order was, "Do you have the jet in sight?" And then a few seconds later, they said, "Pass behind the regional jet." And the collision happened almost immediately after that second instruction, second request.
Was the second instruction given in kind of a warning tone, John? When you hear this, you say, "Hey, do you have it in sight? Black Hawk helicopter, do you have this in sight? Hey, pass behind the regional jet." Was there a sense of urgency in either of those messages?
Yeah, I have to say there was. I mean, I've heard, obviously I've been flying for 20 years, and I've heard, I guess more than that now, but I've heard, plenty of air traffic control transmissions, and when there is stress in the voice, you pick up on it. And I would say there was some stress as that ATC tower controller from Reagan National was trying to talk to the helicopter, and they did seem to sense that they had a problem.
Yeah. John, thank you for your time. Stand by if you've got more information. We'd love to bring you back on. We appreciate that, John Scott. Let's bring back in the senior congressional correspondent, Chad Pergram. He is live near Reagan National. There are planes flying around you at the scene, and what can you tell us about that, Chad?
Yeah, these are helicopters, these rescue and search helicopters that have been flying, and there's been 2 or 3 that have come through and done very low passes in this little inlet of water in this marina over the past few minutes, spraying their searchlight, kind of going back and forth like you would do a railroad lantern, back and forth, left to right. They've done that 3 or 4 times. That's the closest that they've come in here. And one of the reasons we believe that to be the case is I'm told that there are 3 distinct debris fields from the helicopter and then the airplane itself. And so, you know, again, the Potomac River, this time of year, it's down to about 7 feet at the lowest in this area, maybe up to about 20, 21 feet at the highest. So you get some very low areas, especially near the end of that runway. And I talked earlier about how they have those lights that go out into the river on a pier so that the planes can kind of track the runway when they're coming in. But they had not been to this spot that is just south of the runway all night long. I mean, again, the angle was a little bit to the southeast. We're over kind of on the western shore, and I'm looking up. There's another helicopter. Again, this is at a higher altitude, but they were coming at a much lower altitude, probably only maybe 150 feet off the ground, or the water just behind us as they were going around. And I think what they're starting to do right now is start to say, okay, we've checked all the other areas. What else should we be checking? What other parts of the river? Is there something that could have drifted? Again, you know, this incident happened just before 9 o'clock. So this is well into pushing the 4th hour of this. And so is there debris? Could there be people in the water? Could there be, unfortunately, bodies? God forbid. That's what they're starting to look for. But they had not been looking in this region at all. When I first arrived, maybe a little bit after 9 o'clock, maybe about 9, I guess I got here about 9:30 Eastern time. There was one short pass, but they were further out. They had not been this close to what is the western shoreline, the Virginia shoreline of the Potomac River. And again, so the other thing that we're waiting for is this press conference. We're told that the Washington, D.C. Mayor, Muriel Bowser, will take part at this, and also the 2 Kansas senators, Jerry Moran, Republican of Kansas, and Roger Marshall, Republican also of Kansas, again, because that plane, had emanated from Wichita, Kansas, and they will take part in that news conference later tonight. So, again, what is amazing about this scene right now is just the dearth of information. And the idea that we've been out here for so long, and other than, as you reported earlier, Trace, that they had recovered 18 bodies, we haven't heard much more than that. And, you could read that as a good sign, you could read that as a bad sign. The other thing that I've been told here, and I've been listening to some of the radio traffic with the airport, that there were people who were out on planes that were ready to depart, or had just come back in, and they couldn't take them into the airport. And so what they've been doing in about the past hour is getting all those people into the airport, figuring out hotels, figuring out booking agents. As you indicate, the airport's going to be closed until 5 o'clock Friday morning, but there are probably thousands of people in that airport right now that they have to deal with and figure out what is the next step.
Yeah, Chad Pergram, live on the scene for us. Chad, thank you. We're talking about live ATC. We just talked about this with John Scott. And of course, we mentioned that in this conversation between the tower and the Black Hawk helicopter, there were a couple of messages that were sent. And now we're learning that Fox News is reporting that the Army helicopter did respond to the tower. In fact, I'm going to read you the quote here. Fox News is reporting that the Army helicopter did not respond to the tower when they asked if the helicopter had the regional jet in sight. In fact, it appears that they did respond, but on a different tower frequency. So they were on a tower frequency for helicopters. It appears that the tower controller was working both frequencies. And so as John Scott was kind of laying it out for us, and he's probably on this ATC transcript right now, on this voice recording, getting the clarity on this. But we talked about this, and it's very imperative here, because we know there were 2 warnings, and maybe warning is too strong, but there were 2 directions given from the tower to the Black Hawk helicopters. And one of them was to pass behind. And the other one was, do you see the regional jet? And apparently we have been reporting, because that's the information we have, because that's the transcript, that the helicopter did not respond. And now Fox News is saying, getting information that they did respond, but it was on a different line. I want to bring John Scott back in. So John, if you didn't hear any of that, Fox now reporting it appears they did respond, but on a different tower frequency. They were on a frequency for helicopters, and it appears that the tower controller was working both frequencies, which is why in the conversation that you were listening to, you probably didn't hear a response, and nor did any of the pilots we talked to tonight.
Right. Another question. Military aircraft use the UHF frequency primarily for their communications. Some of them are equipped with VHF frequencies, which are what jetliners and small general aviation aircraft like mine use. So it could be that he was on a helicopter frequency or he was on a UHF frequency and maybe talking to the tower, but just not getting the transmission through. That's all going to be part of the investigation.
Yeah, and speaking of the investigation, John, we have that recording now. I know you've probably heard this, but we're going to play it twice. This is the air traffic controller talking to the Black Hawk helicopter. We're going to play it for you a couple of times because it's quick. So listen into this, and then we'll bring John Scott back and get his take on this. Watch.
American 4782 by pass, not for visual. American 472, Washington, 1 star, 320, 17. Did you see that? 472. American 3130, go around, turn left end 250, climb maintain 3000. Okay, left end 350, 3000, American 3130. American 4782 by pass, not for visual. American 472, Washington, 1 star, 320, 17. Did you see that? 472. American 3130, go around, turn left end 250, climb maintain 3000. Okay, left end 350, 3000, American 3130.
Yeah, we kind of looped it a couple of times to hear there, but the thing that I'm caught by and in that, John, is where he says, "Did you see that?" And I don't know what he means. He said, "Did you see that?" It's surprising.
I believe that's another aircraft who saw the explosion. What happens, and I took a minute to listen to that exchange after the last time you and I spoke, and yes, he does first say to the chopper, he says, TAC 25, do you have the CRJ in sight? And then almost immediately he says, TAC 25, go behind, meaning fly behind the regional jet. And the collision takes place in less than 5 seconds after that last transmission, more like probably 3 seconds.
And so you didn't hear it, but it's, and again, and this is unclear, John, but it appears that the helicopter pilot or one of the helicopter pilots did respond, and it would have been, we presume, in that 5 second window before it hit the plane.
Yeah, the instructions from the tower are so rapid fire. I mean, the ATC barely turns off his microphone after asking whether the CRJ is in sight, and then he gets back on virtually immediately. So there was not a lot of time for the chopper pilot to respond. And again, if he was on a different frequency or even on a different band, on a UHF band, it's just, from everything that I'm hearing, it sounds like the two were not talking to one another. They just, the tower wasn't hearing whatever the chopper was saying.
Wow. Yeah. Great insight. John Scott, who's a pilot, been covering aviation analysis and disasters for a very long time. John, thank you. We appreciate your time. And just so we can kind of get a clear vision of this, so the helicopter hits the plane and they both go down. And now we know, and by the way, we're waiting for a news conference you see on the right-hand side of the screen that was set for 12:30 East Coast time. It's now 12:52 and 24 seconds East Coast time. We haven't gotten any word about that news conference being moved up or back or canceled, so it still appears to be not on schedule, but it still appears to be happening at some point in time. But the plane is hit by the helicopter, and they both go into the water. And now we have learned that those aircraft are both in the Potomac, and the helicopter is upside down, and you have the plane that is broken in at least two pieces, which we're being told from the people on the scene, at least two pieces, and they are visible, as Chad Pergram told us. Pieces of the fuselage are visible, and this appears to be those gathering for the news conference, visible, and the teams were on scene to actually go through and assess that. So as soon as we get a shot of the front of this news conference, here we have it right now, let's listen in very quickly.
Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C. I'm at Reagan National Airport. I am joined by United States Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, United States Senator Jim Moran, Senator Roger Marshall, Jack Potter, the CEO of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. We are here to brief you on the very tragic events of this evening, where we know a passenger plane coming to the airport here collided with a military helicopter. Our fire department, DC Fire and EMS, supported by fire departments and police departments from across, are executing a rescue operation in the Potomac River. They are working diligently in very dark and cold conditions, cold water, to execute this rescue operation. We have had the opportunity to be briefed by American Airlines officials. I'm told that American Airlines leadership is on the way to Washington as well, and officials are in the airport talking to families now. We do have a 1-800 number where families should contact us, should contact American Airlines for more information, and we will be providing that information shortly. I am going to turn to a number of officials to provide as much information as we can this evening, and we expect to have more frequent briefings at daylight. So with that, I'm going to turn to Secretary Duffy.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser. I think for all of us, we want to extend our thoughts and prayers to those individuals who were impacted by the events tonight, their families. We know this is a very difficult time for all of them. I want to join the mayor and everyone here to extend our thank you to the first responders who, again, in very difficult situations and environments, are out there searching and attempting to rescue. Tonight, I spoke with President Trump and his team in the Situation Room. I had a conversation with Secretary Pete Hegseth as well, and then with the Kansas delegation and the mayor and others in leadership, as well as Governor Youngkin from Virginia and Governor Kelly from Kansas. From the Department of Transportation and FAA's perspective, we are going to offer full support to those on the ground, to the mayor, but also to the NTSB, who is going to be conducting the investigation in this matter. We are going to provide all the support that's necessary. Mayor.
So with that, I'm going to ask Chief John Donnelly from DC Fire and EMS to provide an update.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Donnelly, Chief of DC Fire and EMS. This evening at 8:48, an alert was sounded, initiating a large regional response to a report of an aircraft crash on approach to the airport. This response includes first the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority's Fire Department, the District of Columbia Fire Department, the Metropolitan Police Department, and the U.S. Park Police to respond into the area and to sort that out. At 8:58, the first units arrived on the scene and found an aircraft in the water and began rescue operations. This incident has grown. There's currently about 300 responders working. We have boats from all throughout the region, police and fire boats. We have a mutual aid agreement in Washington, D.C., the National Capital Region Mutual Aid Agreement administered by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and we're all operating under that. We're operating under a unified command. Everybody's together. So we also have requested state police helicopters from Maryland, and the Coast Guard helicopter is working. So this is a state and federal response as well. U.S. Coast Guard's got some boats in the water as well. So it's a highly complex operation. The conditions out there are extremely rough for the responders. It's cold. They're dealing with relatively windy conditions. Wind is hard out on the river. So they're out there working. We're doing everything we can to keep them safe. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to the mayor.
In Chief Bonnet from MWA.
I'm Rick Bonnet, Fire Chief of MWA Fire and Rescue. Our unit, as Chief Donnelly already alluded to, at 2048, we received an alert from the FAA tower of an aircraft incident involving a commercial aircraft and a helicopter. Our units immediately responded and deployed 3 boats and immediately called for mutual aid resources. Again, as Chief Donnelly said, it's an active operation that's going to last many hours as we continue to work through recovery efforts and rescue operations. This will be ongoing for quite a while. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families and our communities, and we appreciate all DC's support to our agency and our federal partners.
Jesus first. When you wake up in the morning, put him first. When you're tired, put him first. When you've got so much going on and it's so busy and there's so much to do, put him first. The reality is that you can make it without the things that are stressing you out. But you can't make it without Jesus. You've got to put Jesus first. Before your job, before your desires, before your dreams, put him first. Put him first in your schedule. Then put him first in your finances. Put him first. Jesus will be first one way or the other. The Bible says that one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. That means he is first. Everybody's going to acknowledge it one way or another. So why not put him first today?
All authorities across the entire universe have to bow to Jesus Christ.